Can I get a touch of the first one in this one?
Yeah, you bet.
Oh, you're going to compare them?
Yep.
Now it's going to be a weird comparison just because they're such different vintages. The 14 vintage was like really a hot vintage, but the 14 vintage was just a total anomaly in a sense that normally what happens when you get a really hot vintage is you get a lot of sugar in grapes, so you end up with these higher alcohol wines and the acid drops out. But the acid respires basically, and so what happens is just not very interested. I mean, some people like hot weather, hot climate wines, but hot vintage wines. But and in 14 we did have a really hot vintage. But what we also had is we had a huge fruit set. So everybody here was hanging more fruit than they ever had. I mean, a huge fruit set, and there was no reason to drop fruit in 14 because it was an early vintage, and so you knew you'd have plenty of time to ripen it. And so everybody left it on, and I'll tell you, it just played in perfectly to the vintage because the plant could not respire the acidity, and the sugars didn't go up because there was just such a volume of fruit. So,
Can you go back and explain that for me? So we've heard about dropping fruit a lot,
Right.
and kind of understand the concept, but so and which makes sense if this was a hot year, this just feels like it has so much more body to it and so much more complexity.
How does the first one, the 13?
Yeah. For me it does. But how does the dropping the fruit? You said you didn't need to drop the fruit because you knew that they would all have chance to ripen. What did you?
Yeah, it's just that in cooler years, you only know you have so long before you're going to have to pick fruit. Especially if you start late. So if you start late, you say you set X amount of fruit on the vine. Well, the vine's not going to have enough sun throughout the growing season, especially if you're in a cooler year, to ripen it all. So years ago in Oregon, they didn't drop much fruit in hardly any vintage. For one, because they couldn't afford to, and they didn't have, even if they could afford it to in terms of the price they're commanding for wine. It was expensive just to drop the fruit, to have a crew go in and drop the fruit.
Right.
But that really started to change after about 2000. Then really in 1998 was a vintage where we had a very poor fruit set, and kind of the light went on in people's minds like, you know what? If we have less fruit on the vine, it's going to be able to ripen it better. So in these, let's start dropping fruit. So people then started aggressively dropping fruit. And at that same time, people could command more for the wines. So they could do some of this work in the vineyard.
Make it more economically feasible.
Yeah, so routinely we would go through now and drop fruit, especially if we're in any kind of a late year. And if I was in a really late year, I've learned my lesson from 2011 where we did drop fruit, but I would have dropped even more. And 2011 was the coolest year ever. If we have a year like that, I will be so aggressive. We will make a lot less wine, but it's amazing how.
But then the price will go up. Am I correct?
Not really. I mean, it's not really like that. I mean, you have to still base your price on the market, what the market will bear. So you can't, even if you have a year like in 14, everybody has a lot of wine. But the price didn't really go down.
Got it.
And in the years when you don't have a lot.
So you're saving the 14 for when,
Yeah, these 14s are going to be gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous wines with some bottle age, as will the 13s, but they're very different vintages.
They taste very different.
They're very different, yeah.